London, December 1952. A city of over 8 million people. At first glance, nothing was unusual. The streets were busy. The factories were running. The chimneys were burning as they always had. But beneath this ordinary winter morning, something deadly was beginning to form. Something no one could see clearly, and no one understood until it was too late. London in the 1950s was still recovering from war. Coal powered nearly everything. Homes burned it for heat, factories burned it for production, power stations burned it for electricity. It was the lifeblood of the city, and also its greatest weakness. Because every flame added something invisible to the air: smoke, sulfur, and soot. And no one understood until it was too late. December 5th, 1952. A Friday. At first, the fog seemed ordinary. Londoners were familiar with winter fog. For generations, thick mist from the Thames had drifted through the city. Most people barely noticed it anymore. But this fog was different. It wasn't just water vapor. It was mixing with smoke from homes, smoke from factories, smoke from power stations. And because the air above London had become trapped beneath a layer of warmer air, none of it could escape. By midday, visibility was worsening. Shopkeepers noticed it first, then bus drivers, then police officers. The city seemed strangely still. The smoke hanging above London was no longer moving away. It was staying, building, growing thicker with every passing hour. And beneath it, millions of people continued burning coal, unaware they were making the problem worse. As evening approached, the fog changed color. Witnesses later described it as yellow. Others said it looked brown. Many reported a strong smell of sulfur. The air felt heavy. People coughed more frequently. Eyes began to sting. Yet London carried on. Theatres opened, restaurants filled, buses continued their routes. No one yet understood what was happening. Then night fell, and the smog became something far more dangerous. Visibility dropped dramatically, streetlights disappeared, buildings vanished, roads seemed to end in darkness. Across London, people stepped outside and found themselves unable to see more than a few feet ahead. The city was beginning to disappear, and tomorrow things would become much worse. By Saturday morning, London would wake to a city almost completely blind. Buses would stop, flights would be cancelled, people would struggle to find their way home, and the death toll was only beginning. Saturday morning. London awoke to a city transformed. The smog that had settled over the city the previous day had not lifted. Instead, it had grown even thicker. Entire streets disappeared beneath a yellow-brown wall of pollution. Landmarks that had stood for centuries vanished from sight. Even experienced Londoners struggled to recognize familiar roads. The city was no longer simply foggy. It was blind. The transportation network began to fail. Bus drivers could no longer see the roads. Taxi drivers abandoned routes. Rail services slowed. Flights were cancelled. For the first time, London's vast transportation system was being brought to a standstill by the air itself. By midday, visibility in some areas had dropped to only a few feet. People became lost on streets they had known their entire lives. Many navigated by touch, feeling walls, following fences, using memory rather than sight. Some Londoners later recalled being unable to see their own feet. The smog did not remain outside. It entered homes, restaurants, shops, schools. Even indoor buildings began filling with pollution. The air seeped through cracks and open doors. Visibility inside some theatres became so poor that audiences could no longer see the stage. London was suffocating from the inside out. What began as an unusual fog had become a full-scale crisis. Yet the worst consequences remained unseen. The pollution was not only reducing visibility, it was entering people's lungs. With every breath, Londoners were inhaling a deadly mixture of soot, sulfur dioxide, and microscopic particles. By Sunday morning, hospitals would begin reporting an alarming surge of patients, and for many, help would come too late. The city could no longer see. Soon it would struggle to breathe, and the true death toll of the Great Smog would begin to emerge. By Sunday, the effects of the smog could no longer be ignored. Across London, hospitals began reporting an unusual increase in respiratory illness. Patients arrived struggling for breath. Many complained of severe coughing. Others reported chest pain. Doctors quickly realized they were facing something they had never seen before. The elderly were among the first to suffer. Children soon followed. Those already living with asthma, bronchitis, or heart disease faced the greatest danger. For them, every breath had become a struggle, and the smog outside showed no signs of lifting. At first, many officials believed the crisis would pass. After all, London had experienced fog before. But doctors were beginning to notice something deeply troubling. The number of deaths was rising, and not by a small amount. People were dying faster than normal, much faster. By Monday, the Great Smog had spread into every corner of daily life. The air was no longer simply unpleasant, it was dangerous. Transportation struggled to function. Businesses closed early. Emergency services moved slowly through the city. And across London, people were beginning to realize that this was not an ordinary fog. The disaster extended beyond people. Animals were also becoming victims. At livestock exhibitions across London, cattle and other animals began showing signs of severe respiratory distress. Some collapsed, others died. The poisoned air spared no one. Inside hospitals, the situation was becoming increasingly serious. Doctors continued recording respiratory illnesses at an alarming rate. The elderly were dying in large numbers. Children were arriving with severe breathing difficulties. And still, the smog remained. As reports accumulated, it became clear that London was facing something unprecedented. This was not merely a weather event. This was a public health disaster, one that would eventually claim thousands of lives. But before the city could begin counting the dead, the weather finally began to change. On December 9th, 1952, the weather finally changed. A stronger wind moved across southern England. Slowly, the toxic blanket that had smothered London began to break apart. For the first time in days, sunlight reached the streets. Buildings emerged from the haze, landmarks reappeared, and London could finally breathe again. But for thousands of people, the relief had come too late. At first, officials believed the disaster had caused around 4,000 deaths. Even that number was shocking. Yet as researchers continued studying the event, a darker picture emerged. Many victims had not died during the smog itself. They died in the days and weeks that followed. Their lungs had already been damaged, their bodies had already been weakened, and the consequences continued long after the skies cleared. Modern studies would eventually suggest the true death toll was far higher. Today, many historians and researchers estimate that approximately 12,000 people died as a result of the Great Smog. More than 100,000 became ill. It remains one of the deadliest environmental disasters in modern history. But one question remained. How could this happen? How could a modern city be brought to its knees by the air it breathed? Scientists began searching for answers, and what they discovered would forever change Britain's approach to pollution. The Great Smog was not caused by a single mistake. It was the result of many ordinary things happening at the same time. Millions of Londoners heated their homes with coal. Factories burned coal. Power stations burned coal. Day after day, year after year. The smoke had become part of everyday life. Most people barely noticed it anymore. But in December 1952, nature created the perfect conditions for disaster. Above London, a weather phenomenon known as a temperature inversion formed. Normally, warm air rises. As it rises, pollution disperses into the atmosphere. But during the Great Smog, a layer of warmer air settled above colder air near the ground, like a lid on a pot. The pollution became trapped, hour after hour, day after day. The city was sealed beneath its own emissions. Scientists eventually identified another critical factor. The coal being burned contained unusually high amounts of sulfur. When combined with moisture in the fog, the result was a toxic mixture of smoke, sulfur dioxide, sulfuric acid droplets, and soot. Every breath carried microscopic particles deep into human lungs. The fog itself had become poisonous. Public pressure began to grow. The disaster had exposed a truth that could no longer be ignored. Pollution was not merely unpleasant, it could kill. Politicians, scientists, journalists, and citizens demanded action. And eventually, Britain responded. In 1956, Parliament passed the Clean Air Act. The legislation encouraged smokeless fuels, restricted smoke emissions, and helped transform the air quality of British cities. The Great Smog had become a turning point, a tragedy that forced change. Today, the Great Smog of 1952 is remembered as one of the deadliest environmental disasters in modern history. Not because it arrived suddenly, but because it grew from ordinary habits that had become invisible. For 5 days, London disappeared. Thousands lost their lives, and an entire nation was forced to confront the cost of polluted air. The fog eventually lifted, but its lesson remains. A city can survive war, it can survive hardship. But when the very air becomes dangerous, no one is truly safe.